Good afternoon to you. 406 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program today, we're going to be joined by Brent Bozell from the Media Research Center. A lot to talk about with him. A lot of big tech censorship going on with the Republican presidential candidates. We'll give you an update on that story. That's at 4:30. And, of course, today is the Fisher House Radiothon right here on WMAL. Over 2 decades of such a great relationship with the best audience in all of radio, supporting our troops and their families by making the call, 888-294-8560, 888-294-8560 to support the Fisher House. Or you can go online to WMAL.com/Fisher House, make a quick donation there, and support these guys out. God bless you for it. We'll give you some more information coming up on the Fisher House. But for now, I just want to thank you again for the now over $200,000 that's been contributed today to make sure that military families are taken care of and get a bunch of nights paid for in these rooms right alongside many of these military hospitals all around the planet. God bless you for it. Thank you. Let me just share with you some breaking news for a moment today, and I'll tell you ahead of time, it's got a good ending. Senator Joni Ernst was apparently choking today at lunch, and she was saved by Senator Rand Paul, who you should remember is a medical doctor. So Senator Rand Paul performed the Heimlich maneuver on 53-year-old Joni Ernst today while she was choking. And they were able to get her out of it, and she's doing fine. She tweeted a little bit ago, "Can't help but choke on the woke policies Dems are forcing down our throats. Thanks, Dr. Rand Paul." So a good outcome of that story as Rand Paul saves the day, and the left goes on hating him. Even like performs the Heimlich. He's had like a real job. All right, let's move on. We've got stories for you across the country. You've got lefties who are all taking to the street to talk about how much they don't like Israel, and they want to tell everybody, including at events that are dedicated for Christmas. Yesterday, there was the Christmas tree lighting at Rockefeller Center in New York, and nearby that, over at the News Corp building, the headquarters of Fox News, they've got their Christmas tree there as well. And you had all sorts of anti-Israel ghouls who were starting fights with the New York Police Department. They were getting into physical altercations with the NYPD because, of course, they're for peace, you see. That's what they're pushing for. Shut it down. And meanwhile, there's an argument that broke out, many that broke out among protesters. And this audio is described thusly. There were an argument over preventing protesters from going into the street. There's a black man in a keffiyeh who started heckling a black NYPD officer. You gotta wake up, listen to that white man. You gotta wake up, listen to that white man. You gotta wake up, listen to that white man in the morning. Every time you wake up to him, you get your dumb ass in the back. You get your dumb ass in the back. And here you have some audio of cops and protesters throwing punches at each other. For more on this, a man who was on the ground capturing so much of that audio, Julio Rosas. He's the author of Mostly Peaceful with Julio Rosas, the excellent Ssbstack, and the author of the book Firey, but Mostly Peaceful. Julio, good to have you back with us, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Vince.
What did you see in New York City last night?
It was by far the craziest, most chaotic pro-Gaza, anti-Israel protest that I've covered since Hamas's terrorist attacks on October 7th. And I've been to New York many times since then, and the tensions were very, very high from the very beginning. Yeah. Because with the hostage exchange still going on, and they really want a permanent ceasefire, and they want just the end of the quote unquote occupation. They feel like they need to go out and do more and more crazier things to get their point across, because obviously by and large U.S. government's is not adhering to their demands, and so But it's a little shocking to me, even though I've covered a lot of these different events. But it's shocking that this was taking place during a Christmas tree lighting ceremony. And the sad thing about that is that with all those fights that were happening, and as you know, New York City is very crowded as it is, and especially when there's a big event, the sidewalks are almost impassable. So when these fights were breaking out, you have these families with young children being unable to easily get away from kind of the chaos, and so they were put at risk because these agitators were taking their frustration out on New York City police.
I thought in the old days, like, people who were protesting for peace would be peaceful. That's not what's happening here. Do you think any of them detect the irony? They're attacking police officers and setting NYPD hats ablaze and rioting in the streets of New York. Do they realize how ridiculous this is?
Well, in their minds, and this goes back to why people need to really understand and be aware of what's happening in the world. You may not think that the Israel-Hamas war is not our problem, but the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people in the U.S. who have skin in the game one way or the other. And so you're right. I mean, you're attacking New York City cops. How is that going to achieve your goal for something in the Middle East? Well, in their minds, it's one and the same, because they view it as oppression. They view it in the same context of decolonization,
right,
and racism and all the kind of woke terminology that they're really trying to push at the national level. And
yes.
So to them, resisting NYPD cops is in solidarity with Hamas resisting, fighting against Israel.
So in other words, they're not for peace, actually. What they're for is violence against the West and civilization.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There were signs, pre-made signs, mass-produced signs that said "Victory to the Palestinian Resistance," and it's like, well, okay, you can either have them getting a victory in war, or you can have a permanent ceasefire. You can't have both. But they're also chanting for the Intifada to continue on as well. So I mean, their demands and what they say they want doesn't
yes.
exactly line up. And then of course their actions doesn't match up either.
Did you? I saw there was some imagery of. I saw some photos and video of somebody flying a swastika in New York. They had a big sign with a swastika painted on it. Did you happen to see that sign while you were there?
Yes, and it was in reference to the Israeli military, basically just equating Israel and what they're doing in their war against Hamas to Nazism. It's nonsensical, but it's very.
The Jews are the Nazis. That's the frame.
Yes, that's basically because they're saying, well, one genocide doesn't justify another genocide, which of course a genocide is not happening in Gaza. If they were wanting to carry something like that out, they wouldn't be doing what they're currently doing.
Well, a word of advice: if you're planning on flying a swastika, people are going to think you're supporting the Nazis. And they clearly, I mean, the crowd that was out there. Did you hear any sort of qualified condemnation of Hamas or anything like that? There was any indication that people are opposed to terrorism against Israel?
No, because to them it's not terrorism, it's resistance, and resistance is justified when people are occupied. That's what they always chant. It's drilled in my head just because I've been at these things for so many hours. But that's because you ask them, well, do you think Hamas is a terrorist organization?
Right.
And for the most part, and it's not like one or two. I mean, it's the common sentiment. They're like, no, it's not a terrorist organization. It is a justified resistance movement.
So,
and what happened on October 7th was justified because of everything that happened in the past.
So when you ask questions like that, this is the answer Julio gets.
Get the f*** out of here! Get the f*** out of here! Get the f*** out of here! Get the f*** out of here!
So they're like, mindless, just screaming at you that you need to leave. At any rate, Julio, we're up against it, but I really appreciate you joining us and always covering all these important stories. Thank you, Julio Rosas. Good to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Julio's Substack is Mostly Peaceful with Julio Rosas. Please follow him there for firsthand excellent reporting all the time. All right. By the way, Julio, I should also point out, is a veteran. That'll help us segue into this next conversation. He's a Marine. And I always appreciate that about him. And he mixes it up. Who knew that he would need his Marine training to, get out on the streets domestically just to keep his head as he goes into these crazy environments? But it is our veterans today that we're looking to take care of and their families. This is the Fisher House Radiothon. And again, you can support the Fisher House at 888-294-8560, 8560. Joining us now is another United States Marine. His name's Matthew Bradford. He spent 8 months at a Fisher House after losing his eyesight and a leg. Sir, good to have you on the phone. Thank you very much.
Chad, thank you so much for having me.
Give us a sense of well, how were you injured, sir, and what led you to the Fisher House? How were you connected to them?
So I was deployed to Iraq in 2006 with 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, and on point in January 18, 2007, I stepped on an IED where the IED was in a pipe underneath the road, and by the time, after alerting the Marines behind me, I turned around and looked back facing forward, and I looked down at this ditch, and inside that ditch was command wires that went inside the pipe underneath the road, and by that time I was already on top of it, and it exploded directly underneath me, sent shrapnel into both my eyes, and both legs were removed, put me in a coma for 3 weeks in Bethesda, Maryland, and then once I got to San Antonio 5 months later, where I was going through prosthetic training, this was when I first came to know about the Fisher House, because it was my home for the 8 months that I was, really going in and out of therapy. The Fisher House in San Antonio was a 5-minute walk from the Center for the Intrepid, the rehab facility, and they gave me some of the best care at the Fisher House, and with a lot going on and a lot of wounded service members, it was important to have a lot of good connections around.
So at the Fisher House, were there other wounded service members there around you?
There was for me. I was going through rehab with a lot of these guys and girls, and then
Yes.
also, when we were at the Fisher House back in the, away from the therapy, away from the rehab facility, we could actually sit down at a picnic bench or inside the Fisher House and just catch up and chit chat and stuff. And not only for us, but for our parents. I was with my mom, and my mom was around their moms all day when I was in rehab, so they can kind of share what's going on with them as well.
Right. Yeah, they have a very unfortunate but unique set of circumstances that they're really the only ones on the planet who can understand each other, and the Fisher House brings them together. It's an amazing organization. As you look back at it, clearly, you're joining us now to talk about how good the Fisher House is. It must have been such an important asset for you at that point in your life.
Not only for my mom being there, it relieved the stress of her. We didn't have to, they didn't have to throw us in a hotel room 4 out in town.
Yeah.
It was a 5-minute walk, but then also when, I was in rehab from 8 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon with an hour break from lunch. So it was kind of good to escape to the Fisher House up into our room to where it was quiet and peaceful. And, you could sit there and you could think about a lot of things. And especially for me being 20 years old at this time, it was very early in my life and very early in my recovery that, I was still trying to figure a lot about life.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how am I going to live life with a blind double amputee. And, I had a lot of those alone times and those peaceful times in those Fisher House rooms, and having those other injured service members around me, sharing how they went through it and what they dealt with, and just kind of taking a little bit of the wisdom that they shared, some of those nuggets, and, helped me out along this journey.
I have this in my notes. Is this true? You re-enlisted after your injuries?
I did. I re-enlisted 3 years after I got hurt. I heard you mention earlier about being a Marine. It's just, when I was in those dark spots in the hospital and wanting to give up and wanting to quit, it was being a Marine that kept me alive, that kept me pushing through each and every day, because Marines don't quit. They don't give up.
They don't.
So when I wanted to re-enlist because I had a lot of those, those service members, like I just mentioned, that would come to me and help me out through my recovery when I was in those dark places. And, a couple years later, I became that person to where the Marines at BAMC San Antonio would like, hey, Matt, there's another blind veteran, another blind service member here. Why don't you go talk with him? And the reason why I wanted to re-enlist is because I wanted to be that person to go in those hospital rooms to share with the individual that life's not over. Just because you lost a leg, just because you're burnt, just because you're blind, like there's a lot to do in life, and you could do that. And one of my biggest things when I first got hurt is living a normal life. So I do marathons, I do Spartan races, I do climb mountains, I've jumped out of planes, I fish, I hunt, I live a normal life, because I know that just because I lost my legs and I lost my eyesight, I didn't lose my life. There's a life for me.
Boy, you are a Marine. Matthew Bradford, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for helping us tell the story of the Fisher House and how it played a role for you in your life. And not only thank you for your service as a Marine, thank you for your ongoing service today to support the Fisher House. It means a lot. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Fisher House as well.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate that. All right. That's Matthew Bradford, and this is the Fisher House we're talking about. The number's 888-294-8560. By the way, I always feel awkward. I know the enlisted guys don't want to be called sir, but I can't help it. I was raised in a military household, and we were told sir and ma'am to all these guys. It's just a sign of my respect for him. I have great respect for him. The number 888-294-8560, 888-294-8560. The website, WMAL.com/Fisher House. I never have more paperwork in front of me than during the Fisher House Radiothon. We're balancing all the news stories, all the great guests, all the information about the Fisher House, and all of the slips of paper that our producer, Corey and Ganamort, keeps on bringing into me of who's making contributions, how much they gave. Try and read out some of these great big numbers out, and the totals here. And the totals as of this hour, in terms of, as of this half hour, the contributions so far today from WMAL and its great audience to the Fisher House, $202,538. Now, the key, I should tell you a little bit behind the scenes here. All of the shows here on WMAL, we do kind of track what the other shows are doing, right? You're like, hey, how did Plant do this morning? How did the morning show do today? Yeah, we're paying attention to that here. So don't even get me in a position where I don't even have to ask that question. I don't want to know what that. Forget, they're not catching up. The morning, come on now. They're never going to catch up to the Vince Coglianese show. It continues. Coming up, we're joined by Brent Bozell from the Media Research Center. We've got to talk about big tech censorship with him. That's ahead, and the Fisher House Radiothon continues. Please call that number, 888-294-8560, or go online to WMAL.com/Fisher House. Good afternoon to you. It's 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us on the phone today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Coming up, we've got a number of excellent guests to join us to talk about their experience with the Fisher House. It is the WMAL Fisher House Radiothon. You can contribute today by dialing 888-294-8560, 888-294-8560, or going to the website, WMAL.com/Fisher House. It really is very easy just to go there and make a quick donation, even if it's not $20, $5. You can do it in a heartbeat. Apple Pay makes it super quick, actually. It's pretty convenient. WMAL.com/Fisher House. And we'll give you more updates on that coming up throughout the program, as you might expect. I want to talk about big tech censorship, though. It's coming at us in a bunch of different ways. And one of those ways is that the 2024 presidential candidates are being all censored to varying degrees by the big tech companies. And for more on this, I want to bring in a guest on the subject. It's Brent Bozell. He's the founder and president of the Media Research Center and the chairman of For America, and knows all about it. Brent, great to have you with us, sir.
Vince, thanks for having me.
What are these big tech companies up to when it comes to politics in 2023 and going into the election?
Well, you've heard them say for years that they don't censor anybody, that they're only platforms of information, and they're objective and balanced and all that kind of stuff. And it simply is not true. And they've gotten all sorts of legal protections as a result of this, and it really needs to be examined. And we did studies showing how they put their thumbs on the scale in 2020, how they did it in 2022, and they're doing it again with the 2024 campaign. What we looked at in our most recent study was to see who was being censored and why in the presidential race. And the numbers are just startling. We found that Joe Biden had been censored 7 times. And that was usually for things like ads that were done incorrectly. But Trump's opponents were censored so far since the start of the campaign 162 times. And that just is not by happenstance. When it's 162 to 7, there's an agenda going on there. So then we look more deeply to see who was being censored and why. And it's interesting, Vince. The man most censored on the Republican side is Vivek Ramaswamy. Why? Because he has challenged the Biden administration's climate policies, and he's been censored for it. The second most censored was RFK Jr., and that's because he's questioned the administration on the COVID policies. And the third most censored, which was rather interesting, was Nikki Haley. Why? Because she is the least pro-life Republican candidate there. She has called for a ban on late-term abortions and nothing more, but even that got her censored. And then the fourth most is DeSantis. DeSantis has been censored because he has spoken out against human mutilation to little children with transgenderism. That got him censored. But then the final point on all this was to see who is doing the censoring. And this is really jumps off the page. It is not TikTok doing it. It is not X doing it. It is not Facebook doing it. In the 162 examples that we looked at, 69% of the time that you saw censorship, it was coming from Google. Another 22% of the time, it was coming from YouTube, which is owned by Google. So 91% of all the censorship taking place against Republicans is coming out of one company, and it's Google.
And when you say censorship, I realize in your report that you indicate, for instance, that like there'll be an interview with Robert F. Kennedy, and he'll be talking about the pharmaceutical companies or the government being out of control and the lies about the COVID shots, all of this. And YouTube will delete the videos. They'll censor them.
Sure,
they'll make it. Yeah.
Sometimes a video will get deleted. Sometimes a warning flag will go up. Don't believe it. There are all sorts of games that big tech is playing these days. One company that people haven't seen yet enough of is NewsGuard. NewsGuard is a media monitoring organization that projects itself to be objective and balanced. It is anything but. It's a left-wing organization, and it then looks at sites, at conservative sites, media sites. They may have done it to you. I don't know. They look at conservative media sites, and they declare that they're not trustworthy, and then they go to the advertisers and say words to that effect. Advertisers then don't advertise on those companies, and it's now hurting financially these organizations. So people don't realize, but this censorship is coming in a million different directions, as you just said.
It's massive. It's massive, and that's done intentionally. They're trying to bleed sources of information dry if they don't conform to the left, and that's look at Elon Musk. He's up against it right now. They're literally trying to drive an advertiser boycott on him, and it's having some effect. And he says that in the end, if they succeed, they will collapse this social media site, which has become kind of one of the last bastions for free speech in social media.
There's a reason that the First Amendment is the First Amendment. A democracy can't survive without free speech. And what you have in essence here is an assault on democracy itself. Because how can an electorate make a informed decision when they're not getting information? It reminds me of learning that in Red China, it took 25 years for anyone to learn that man had landed on the moon because it had been kept from them. Well, this is the same idea. It's the very same idea. I don't want you to question my position on COVID-19, so I censor you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't want you to hear. I don't want to hear you challenge me on my radical climate agenda, so I censor you, Vivek. I don't want to hear you talk about human mutilation with children, so I censor you, DeSantis. That's what's happening.
It's amazing. So when you do that, if you have the biggest information companies on the planet censoring legitimate knowledge, information, and conversation about what's actually going on in your country, specifically to influence the election, how is that anything but rigging the election, Brent Bozell?
It is. Why is it that you and I have got a limitation of $5,000 or whatever that we can give in a presidential candidate before we max out? Why is it that corporations are not allowed to contribute to presidential campaigns? But when the amount of money, the value of this censorship, it's incalculable. What the cost of this enterprise to shut down free speech. So is it a campaign activity? Of course it is, which is why we think there should be hearings. There should be congressional hearings on why it is that one company has so much power over the electoral system that it nullifies what you and I and millions upon millions upon millions of people may be saying at the ballot box when they have the power to move the needle completely in the opposite direction simply by withholding. Look, it all boils down to this. If you had an open discussion on the news, if you had an open discussion on the internet, frankly, Joe Biden will never be president. Frankly, none of his policies would be enacted today because America would be would revolt around against this idea. If the American people knew what was happening on the border, do you think they would stand for it?
Exactly.
If the American people knew what was going on in the streets with crime out of control, would they stand for it? If the American people knew what the administration was doing with their taxpayer money to push the radical climate agenda that they have, do you think the American people would stand for it? Well, these radicals know this. They know that the American people wouldn't stand for this, so they shut it down.
They definitely do. And let me direct people to something that they should know about. The Media Research Center has a great resource that tracks all of this big tech censorship. You can go to censortrack.org. It's an awesome resource. I genuinely use it because it keeps an index of all the times that the big tech companies are really putting their finger on the scales that we know about. This is just the stuff that we know about when it comes to our elections. Brent Bozell, founder and president of the Media Research Center, thank you for being a great patriot, and thank you for your time today, sir.
Thank you, Vince. Thanks for having me.
That's Brent Bozell. Appreciate him as always. Let me get back to the Fisher House Radiothon here now with you. The number, 888-294-8560 to support the Fisher House, 888-294-8560 to support our troops, WMAL.com/Fisher House. I'm very pleased to be bringing in our next guest on this subject, and that is Dave Coker. He's the president of the Fisher House Foundation. He was the foundation's first employee. He was hired by the founder, Zachary Fisher, and he's been working for nearly 3 decades now on this great project. Dave, good to have you with us, sir.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Vince. I'll tell you, the listeners at WMAL are just absolutely amazing. And you can't say enough about them and what they allow us to do.
It's. I was just saying earlier, when we ask people for support, I feel like we've reached the point now, over 2 decades of doing this together, Fisher House and WMAL, that really what we're doing as we do the Radiothon is we're kind of giving people an update on what they've already done. We're telling, here's a report card on how much success you have had. Dave Coker, tell people what the Fisher House is up to these days and who they're helping.
Well, we're on the road to 100 houses. We have 96 operating now. We've got 3 more in construction. This next spring, we'll start construction on Fisher House number 100. But what we're able to do is reach out. We have at least 1 house at every major military and medical center. And Zach received a letter from a nurse at VA who said, you're doing great things with the military. We really need it for our veterans as well. And so we've been able to take that bold step and reach out to VA hospitals and make a difference. I'm a recovering healthcare administrator from the Army in my career. And I look at it as many times the military healthcare system saves your lives, and the VA gives you back your life through the rehabilitation and recovery programs they have. And we're able to go out to more and more of the VA medical centers and bring a new resource to communities that have a tremendous need.
Yeah, it's remarkable. The military is built to train and to take care of service members, but there are some places where the military just can't operate, and this is where the Fisher House steps up. And I think my sense is, I think the WMAL audience knows, but that a lot of people don't realize that when it comes to the families, the kind of in the past, they would have been on their own. They would have had to figure it out, get to a hospital, get to figure out a way to get on base. You got to buy hotel rooms. The Fisher House takes care of all of that, Dave.
Well, when you get that call and you learn that you've got a loved one who's wounded, ill, or injured, you want two things. You want the best medical care, and you want to be there. Well, the military and VA have world-class healthcare systems. Having a place for families to stay is a little bit more of a challenge. And I've actually met families at the house that when they got that call would come into town, stop at Walmart, get some pillows and a blanket because they didn't know where they were going to stay. They knew they couldn't afford a hotel, but they were going to be there.
Yeah.
And when they learn that there's a place like Fisher House where they can be supported, they're just I don't want to say they're in shock, but they're humbled. And I was once asked, isn't it tough to be around people going through such hard times? And they face tremendous challenges. But the way these families approach it is nothing short of inspirational.
I know in some cases you have families that stay there for many months on end. You talk about hotel rooms. Just imagine if you had a sudden event in your life, a sudden trauma of some kind that you needed to attend to. You go and then you don't have any place to stay. You end up staying in a hotel room night after night after night. The expenses out of control. How long do people stay at Fisher Houses, Dave Coker?
Well, most families are with us for 5 to 7 days, a relatively short stay. But it's not unusual to have stays of months or even over a year, especially when you hear the stories of people who are trying to salvage a limb and they've had 22 surgeries, or if they've suffered burns. That is a long process with dozens of surgeries. Actually, the longest length of stay we've had is just over 4 years. And that was a spouse who had a MRSA infection, became a quad amputee, and then learned how to use prosthetics to regain a quality of life. And the last time I saw her, she stood up and helped me cut a cake.
It's amazing. It's just amazing. Well, Dave Coker, I say it all the time. You are using your gifts that God has given you in a way that just helps so many people. We're appreciative of you. We're appreciative of the Fisher House. And thank you so much for maintaining this very close relationship with us for all these years. It's just been such a great relationship, and I think it's doing a lot of good. So, Dave Coker, thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you, Vince. And again, the WMAL audience is just an amazing audience, and we're grateful for what they allow us to do.
Just the best. Dave Coker, president of the Fisher House Foundation, today during this Fisher House Radiothon. You can call 888-294-8560, just like Patricia from Verona did. Over the course of the last few minutes, we just found out she donated $2,000 after hearing from our guest, the Marine, who was blinded and now a double amputee as a result of his injuries in an IED attack. And he went on, he re-enlisted in the military. He helps wounded service members. And Patricia heard that interview, and she called in and she donated $2,000 to support the Fisher House. God bless you, Patricia. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I got papers everywhere, like I said. Always have papers all over the place. Again, thanks to so many great WMAL listeners. Scott, Alexandria donating $1,000. Jacques donating $2,000. So cool. Harry in Sykesville, Maryland, $1,000. Patricia from Verona, $2,000. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to help out a great cause, the Fisher House. And, and Dave Coker had it right. The Fisher House has been connected with WMAL, and as a result, they have tripled the number of houses they have at the Fisher House to 96 now. They're on their way to their 100th house. He said they'll be there in the spring. trying to get them up at all of these VA medical centers, all of these military hospitals, active duty military hospitals around the planet, and to take care of these families and troops. God bless you for it. And the total as of this hour, right here on WMAL, I'm told we are moving with some speed this year. $207,588. Let's keep it going. The next hour of the Vince Coglianese Show, just minutes away.